Alrighty, we're up. We are going to be talking about HBO's hit show Barry, starring Bill Hader. Uh, I am Greyworks. I'm an indie animator, director, and comedian, and you can find my stuff if you just type in Greyworks online on YouTube anywhere. Josh, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, how's it going? My name is Josh. I am the host of the Afternoon Tune podcast. The Afternoon Tune, you can find us on all the social medias, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, all that good stuff at the Afternoon Tune. We're also on YouTube, youtube.com, the Afternoon Tune. We're also Twitch, twitch.tv/Afternoon Tune, usually streaming every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, doing a variety of movie reviews, pop culture discussions, TV show reviews, sometimes video game reviews, things like that. If you want to send us an email, you can do so at theafternoontune@gmail.com. We're also where we listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. If you see us on any of those platforms, make sure to leave a good 5-star review. That helps boost the podcast and does a lot for us. But that's basically what we do there.
Right. Any movies you guys are going to see and talk about soon?
Actually, so my co-host Nick and some few other guest co-hosts are going to be doing a show today at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. I'm going to be reviewing The Exorcist Believer, which is the requel, I guess, as they say, of the Exorcist franchise from David Gordon Green, who also did Halloween. He did a requel of that. They're also going to be discussing Saw 10.
Oh,
They're
I
also
saw
going to be
that.
and they're also
Don't you
going to be
mean
doing a
Saw
review.
X?
Yeah,
Saw X.
we're Latin
Okay.
now.
Yeah, getting fancy. And then they're also going to be doing a series review for Ahsoka, season 1. They're going to be doing a
Nice.
review for that.
Alrighty. Mac, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us what you're working on.
Yes. My name is Mac of Macabre Storytelling. I am a YouTuber, make video essays, usually on television shows and movies. Currently working on a series review of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Funny enough, just last night I finished the scripting, and today I was going to do some script editing to try and get it ready for audio recording. But my sleep schedule is absolutely screwed up. Hence why I am not currently on camera with the other two gentlemen, because you would not want to see what I currently look like.
Yeah.
But yeah, just doing that, and then this month is the Chicago International Film Festival. Me and my girlfriend are actually going to be going to, I think, like 5 or 6 showings, which
Jesus.
is usually we go to like 1 or 2. It's fun, but this year we were like, no, let's be like, pretentious nerds and like actually go and see a bunch. So maybe I'll do like a video where I talk about I'm seeing The Killer of Fincher, which is coming out. So about a month before everyone else, I'm gonna get to see it. So maybe I'll do a video on that. We'll see.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's funny. Mac's been talking about his Avatar video for a while, and he got into it because there was like a Twitter fight, basically, of like there's a big Twitter argument about Korra. So, but
Yeah, I'm not really even sure, because a lot of people are asking me, it's like, what are you gonna do Korra after? And it's like, I don't know if I want to. I
Yeah.
feel like it's gonna be like, it's one of those things where Avatar is pretty well received, and even for people who are kind of detractors of it, which aren't many, it's not like the discourse on it isn't like too vitriolic or anything like that. It's pretty like well received, and the fans, well, some of the fans, I'm sure, like depending, some of my critiques of Avatar, I'm sure I'm gonna get like some
nerd
or some maybe death threats from some people.
Hell
Like,
yeah.
hey, don't ever talk about my series like that. Whereas a Korra, it feels a lot more like, I don't know. It feels like there is some sort of like culture war aspect to it, which I'm not really sure where it's coming from. Maybe because she's a girl, maybe because there's some other shit in it.
A
I
bit.
don't know. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird. I can't really
Yeah.
tell, but yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned it, because I am currently working on a video essay about Barry, mainly about Sally Reed, who was one of the co-leads. And while we're here, why don't we just get into it? Barry is a show on HBO about a former Marine turned hitman from the Midwest who, after like a chance encounter, ends up ends up working for the Chechen mob boss. But then soon later, after the Chechen mob boss ordeal goes south, he finds himself wanting to be an actor and has a new light for life. However, things get worse and worse as Barry's self-destructive tendencies just spiral out of control, and it becomes an ensemble cast by season 2. And so, just a heads up, full spoilers for Barry and maybe Breaking Bad and Sopranos, just other anti-hero shows.
Just all the shows.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But yeah, because the reason I want to talk about this is because Barry, while it does start out, the first few episodes do start out kind of traditional for a show like this of your Dexters, your Breaking Bads, of like the character having like having new motive in his life. It's not as a criminal, but it's as an actor, and so we have to. You think, oh, maybe Barry can be redeemed. He might be your traditional anti-hero, but then it's revealed that is not the case, and Barry's not the protagonist of the story. He's the villain. So, mainly, I love this show. I think it's an amazing breath of fresh air. It's funny, it has great characters, and it doesn't. It leans away from fan service for like quality writing, which I really really respect. What are your guys' general thoughts on Barry?
You want to go first, Macabre, or?
Yeah, sure. I've been a fan of Barry. Well, funny enough, there's actually a debate between me and my girlfriend, where apparently like 3 years ago we watched the first season, and we were going to like continue watching it. But then something happened where we didn't. And then just maybe like a year ago, it was leading up to, or maybe not a year, May 20. Yeah, so maybe like a year ago, um, or maybe like I don't know, like 6 to 9 months. It was earlier in the spring. Um, I was like, hey, should we catch up on Barry so we can watch it when it airs the finale? Because it's going to be the same night as Succession. It'll be real fun. And my girlfriend's like, yeah, I'd like to, but you said that you didn't want to watch it after season one. And I was like, I don't think that's correct. And she's like, that is correct. And this must have been like years ago because the show kind of went on hiatus for a bit due to COVID.
Yeah, pandemic.
And so, yeah, even to this day, we've been dating 5 years, and our biggest fight is apparently I said that I didn't like the first season of Barry, that I wanted to stop watching it, and I refuse to accept that because I'm like, I can't imagine because now that I've seen the show all the way through, it's probably one of my top TV shows in terms of particularly in regard to Barry's characterization, how the show treats him as a quote unquote anti-hero.
Yes.
Which I really don't even really think that he is. I think the show is almost satirically. At the beginning, it almost wants you to think he's an anti-hero, but the show all along knows that he isn't, that he's actually the villain of the story.
Mm-hmm.
But this initial setup is the idea that, oh, look, he's an anti-hero. He's, he does bad stuff, but he's actually a good guy. But then as the show goes on, it actually sort of reveals that actually, no, he's not. He's actually, not only is he a terrible human being and is ruining the lives of everyone around him, this has always been the case from the very beginning of Inception. Bill Hader, I think, if you look into like interviews with it, he's very explicit on that. Like, I think he even said like he doesn't even like referring to Barry as an anti-hero. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was done amazing. Like, I do think the first season, not bad, is kind of the weakest, but it's interesting because the first season is the closest you would get to like a conventional anti-hero story. I'd say up until episode 5, where we see what Barry will really do if his life is in danger, like who he's willing to sacrifice for his own personal happiness. Josh, your thoughts?
Yeah. So Barry, I really like the show a lot. I got into it a little bit late. I think I just heard people talking about it, so I didn't get into till maybe season 2 or 3. I think when it was on. And I think it really, I saw what a lot of people thought about how great it was. And it's funny that Macabre, he's talking about doing a video about Avatar. Avatar just recently was on the list of like top 50 best shows of the 21st century. Like, I don't know if you all saw that.
Yeah.
And I was looking through the list, and I'm surprised Barry wasn't on that list. I saw some other shows on the list, but I'm surprised like Barry wasn't actually on that list. Because I think
it was kind of a weird list.
All those lists are kind of weird, especially like top 100 characters. But
yeah. So I thought that was kind of funny, but yeah, as I agree with Macabre as far as I don't really see Barry as an anti-hero, because when you look at like anti-heroes, like if you look at maybe one of the most popular ones, maybe is Punisher. Like everybody probably will talk about the Punisher as being one. And the thing that what makes him an anti-hero is like he'll do bad things. Like of course he'll murder people. but he's murdering, kingpins, and he's murdering, gangsters and mobsters and things like that. Like, looking at Barry, it's just like he's really got no redeeming qualities really as a person,
Yeah.
or in the people that he kills. It's like, he's got a little bit of a line of code because he won't kill a kid. There's that scene where he wouldn't do that. But I mean, the way that kid was jumping on him, I was like, hey, okay, I could have kind of let you go with that one. I
Yeah.
mean, you could have done some like the Northman type stuff where you kind of like accidentally kind of did it maybe and be like, okay, well, I kind of get it. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, I don't really see Barry as an anti-hero at all, really. I think he's just a straight villain.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the Punisher and Barry's somewhat code at first, because that's something I want to talk about with Barry and how it kind of criticizes the common like anti-hero or villain protagonist portrayal. If anything, I think Barry has been making fun of the anti-hero portrayal, because when we first see him, it's after a hit and he just kills like it's after he kills some random guy basically. But then he goes to LA to meet the Chechen mob boss, and the Chechen mob boss in there wants Barry to kill someone, not because he's like a bad person, but because he slept with his wife. And so we kind of get the implication that the people throughout most of the series, most of the people who Barry is hired to kill are just like average people who cheat on like men's wives or like men who have affairs, and stuff like that. So it's like he doesn't really have he and when he tells Gene, "Oh, I kill bad people," not really. He just kills. I think Bill Hader has talked about this with portraying violence on Barry. Like violence in Barry, other than maybe the first episode, it's very. Not only is it very, when it does happen, it's either quick or flat, and you can't really see it, or it's like it's drawn out and it's incredibly like almost deadpan, like comedy, like it's slow and it's weird and like it's the least sexy form of violence you're going to see on TV. uh what are your guys' thoughts on the violence in Barry?
I think it's all very purposeful in the sense of it's always it's at no point is the violence trying to be like badass. There never seems to be this idea that when we see violence done, it's supposed to mean like, oh man, Barry's like so cool. Even the way it's shot is very sort of unspectacular. Like I'm thinking of the first
Shit. With NoHo Hank.
episode where he shoots, NoHo Hank and the other two assassins after they just spoilers. I think we already went over that. When they kill Ryan in the first episode, and it's just this very like matter of fact pop pop pop. It's not this like big action sequence, and that kind of carries over throughout. And to your point, it kind of going over when you were saying, it's trying to set Barry up as like, oh, he's like this good guy because he's a hitman, but he only kills bad people. Not only is that subverted in the first episode because the first person we see him hired to kill outside of the very opening flashback, like little opening blurb, is just a guy who's fucking the mob boss's wife. What's really interesting is that when we, especially if you rewatch it, it's if I were to tell you it's a story about a hitman who reevaluates his life and finds passion in acting and wants to become an actor to leave his past behind, you would think that like, oh, okay, so he must be like, he's clearly like traumatized from his killing and all the people he's killed, and he wants to get out of that life. But that actually I don't think is true. It's when you rewatch the first episode, it isn't that like Barry is like, I really don't think he even feels.
I think he's bored, honestly.
Exactly. It's like, it's not like remorse. He doesn't like have like a guilty conscience, which is what I think a lot of other movies will sort of frame, like William Money and Unforgiven. It's like he's disgusted with himself from what he's done. Barry doesn't really care. He's kind of like, he's kind of indifferent to it. He just is, he's just having like a midlife crisis. He's just kind of
essentially
bored. It's not so much that like, yeah, it's almost less of like, it's not so much that I care about the consequences of my actions. I just don't find fulfillment in doing it anymore, which is such a brilliant,
terrifying
thing of just how, at the base of his core, how unempathetic and how his inability to really empathize with his fellow man. And there are cases where we see that. So, later on with Chris and his widow, after he kills Chris in season 1. But even then, it's like, as the show goes on, especially, we almost don't trust it, because it's, is this him actually showing remorse, or is it sort of like an act that he's, because there's even that great little scene. It's played off as a joke, but in episode 2, after Kuznets tells him that Ryan's dead, all the actors go, and then he turns around with the like, he actually feigns surprise, or he feigns shock. And then, of course, like, everyone else is grieving, and he's like, okay.
Yeah. I think people also forget that at the end of episode 1, he was totally going to kill Ryan.
Like, that's a great point. Yes.
Yeah. Like, really regardless of even like him being allowed in that class of Cousteau and him having like a brief heart to heart, like, you see glimmers of like a sympathetic side, but that's like, no, Barry killing is Barry at his most natural. And there was I watched a bunch of behind the scenes with Bill Hader. We were holding hands. Bill Hader said, like, he was talking about the end of season 3, and he said the reason Barry goes back is because Barry is a self-preservation monster. If this really didn't matter to him, if he wanted to prioritize someone else, Barry would just say, I don't care, get in the car, let's go. But he doesn't, because Barry's a selfish murderer. Josh, your thoughts on the violence?
The way the violence is done in the show, very visceral. It's not too stylized. It's not something like you'll see maybe in something like a John Wick movie or something, like, like when you're dealing with an assassin character. There's some good moments here that a lot of people praised. I remember when that episode came out. I forgot what season it was. It was
Ronnie and Lily?
He was on a motorcycle.
Oh, that was season 3.
Season 3, yeah, it was like that shot of him on the motorcycle. He's being chased, and everything like that. Like that, a lot of people praised that, how it was shot. It's like, hey, this is better than some movies, because some movies will do a bunch of cuts and everything like that. So that's done. And then even in the final episode, where it's like the grenade went off, and then one of the very few final episodes where the grenade went off, and you saw like the bodies everywhere and all that confusion and everything. Like, the way that was done was really well. So a lot of it feels very visceral, feels very real, not too stylized. And then, usually when you get a character who's like an important character of the show, like, their moment is about to come, you feel it about to come. Then Barry's like, no, it just happens, which I think it just kind of takes you out there a little bit.
Yeah. It's interesting you brought up the motorcycle scene, because that scene and the biggest action scenes are clearly where Barry's character can wear a mask or a helmet, so Bill Hader can have a stunt choreographer do it. Not just like he doesn't want to do all this stuff, but the action is there. Yeah, Bill Hader said I want to frame action in a way that's not like wow, but more like what. The violence in this is this is a weird transition, but it's kind of how I hope they're making a Blood Meridian movie. And it's kind of how I hope how the violence is portrayed in that. Because in the book, Blood Meridian is very much a critique of like American violence and history and stuff like that. And the violence is very brutal and fast and gory, and it makes you feel like you're gonna throw up. But it's like it doesn't dwell on it too much, which I always really, really like.
Have you ever seen Vinland Saga?
Yes, I have. That something similar.
Okay.
But yeah, it's always an interesting conversation, because I do believe you can portray violence in a movie or TV show just as like a spectacle, as art, because I believe anything can be portrayed as art. But when you want like a series like this that's meant to like critique the character's more problematic like behavior, you don't want to like indulge in violence to a degree, which is kind of a issue I have with just kind of a lot of anti-heroes or villain protagonists in general, like Walter White or Billy Butcher or stuff like that. I do think that the shows also, or even like Dexter and like Rick Sanchez, they're like, yeah, they're bad, but they're like, aren't they fucking cool when they do this? Aren't they so strong? Aren't they like so smart? And here just kind of frames Barry as almost as a dope. Like the show makes fun of Barry a lot, which leaves me to our next segment, the comedy. This show is hilarious. I think it's. What do you guys think of the comedy in this?
I think where it comes from is it's funny. It is a funny show, and there are moments of like actual like straight up comedy, especially like in terms of like with Sally and Cousineau. But I think particularly when it comes with Barry, almost all the comedy is very, or at least a good portion of it in terms of Barry's arc is very like almost like late Sopranos tier, where it's very ironic. It's very like disturbingly fucked up. Like it's
strict
like
Catholic.
yeah, or like that scene I just mentioned where Ryan's dead, and then he's like, "Oh no!" It's it's played for laughs, but there's like a very dark undercurrent for it. It sort of highlighting that Barry is this sort of he's not this like sweet guy who's actually like who's underneath it all. He wants to do good and be a good person. Or I mean, maybe I should rather rephrase that. He wants to be a good person, but he wants to do it on his terms. And that's sort of the issue where from the very beginning, Barry is like, and of course the best running joke of the show is starting now. It's this idea that it's like, oh, I want to be a good person. I want to do the right thing. And the entire
Like, turn
time
yourself in.
yeah, it's like there's one way for you to do this, and it's for you to turn yourself in or just like own up to your actions. And he's like, no, that's no, I don't think. And I think for me, that's the funniest. As dark as it is, as fucked up as it is, that is the funniest sort of occurring comedy throughout the show. Is that here's this guy who's, man, how do I redeem myself? And it's like, well, you could do this, and he's like, no, I'm not doing that.
I think you bringing that up reminds me of the scene where after Gene finds out Barry killed Janice in season 3 and confronts them, and Barry kidnaps Gene. We see how fucked up Barry's mind is. Of like Barry's mindset is, oh, Gene's an acting coach, but he hasn't had a job in years because he's a dick. I'm gonna get him an acting job, and that's gonna make everything better.
That was season 3, particularly, is where
it's one of my favorites.
We really saw, and I think that was after the hiatus because I think season 2 aired in 2019, and then season 3 aired in like 2022. I think.
Yeah. There's also a in-universe like small time jump between those two, between season 3 and 2. But yeah, it's also like where he's on the phone with Fuchs, and you just see how like childish they both are. It's like, by the way, me and Gene made up. I'm gonna fix his life with acting. How the fuck are you gonna do that? Why do you care? I don't.
I almost wonder if I don't know for sure exactly, but I almost wonder if Bill Hader was, while he was building the character of Barry, he was almost self-conscious about the audience kind of like not realizing that Barry was, and this is like the whole Walter White syndrome where people were like, or even Tony Soprano, where a lot of these creators are like, oh wait, you guys aren't supposed to like empathize with him that much. You guys aren't supposed to like him this much. And so the fact that season 3 opens with Barry, the opening scene, it's funny too because like throughout season 2 he only kills people at the very end, and then in season 3 he executes 2 men within like the first like 2 minutes of the show, in a very like blasé manner. And then of course at the end of the episode, it's like it really highlights just how, oh, Barry's a psycho. Yeah. And it's like, and of course, like up until then, we're like, well, you should have known that by now. He's like killed like countless dozens of people. But that was really when the show was like, it was almost like Bill Hader, like, okay, you guys didn't get it, so I have to kind of like really shove it in your face a bit.
Yeah.
Is Josh, that the? Oh, I was going to ask him. Was that the scene where the dude's like the dude changed his mind and then he killed him? Like, you can't just change him.
You can't forgive Jeff.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Josh, I want to ask you, what do you think about the kind of tone change in season 3? Because I brought this up before, watching season 3 of Barry. No, well, it does become an ensemble cast. Barry doesn't even seem like the main character anymore, like the protagonist, in a very good way. He seems more like he was a bad guy from the beginning, but here he seems like the central antagonist of the whole show. What do you think about the whole tone shift?
Yeah, so kind of like in the way of like something like Breaking Bad, as you guys mentioned about how you take this guy and how his sickness is kind of spreading to everybody and it's kind of ruining everybody. You see that in his relationship with Sally. You see that in his relationship with Gene. And so everybody in a way, and these people in their own way were kind of messed up. I mean, not even as messed up as someone like Barry, but they were all kind of broken in their own way, and we see that as the series continues. But yeah, and when you look at, like, you talk about the comedy of the show, always had the good dark humor that I really like in the show that I thought was really effective. That still maintained. I think got a little bit darker as the show went on. I mean, I think everybody talks about, like, huge standout is NoHo Hank. He's always like a big Anthony Carrigan.
He
And
was
I remember
actually
that scene. It was in the final season. Oh, yeah,
I'm just saying, No Whole Hank was originally just being the first episode that he was going to get shot to death by Barry, but Anthony
yeah.
Cargan was just like so funny. They're like, we gotta bring this guy back on.
Yeah, like a Jesse Pinkman type of situation. He was supposed to
Kinda,
die
yeah.
like at the first. Yeah. And I remember that scene. It was in the final season where he's like opening the box of heads, and he's like, "Why am I still opening this box? I know this is gonna be in it. Why am I still opening these? And just stuff like that. I think works really well. I think he's a big standout. I think, is he up for an Emmy this year, Anthony Carrigan?
Maybe best. I wouldn't be shocked. Like best supporting actor. But as we're on the subject, let's talk about the supporting cast who later become main characters. I really love this cast for the most part. I think almost all these characters' arcs are near perfection. The only one I would say I wouldn't, I don't think it's a bad arc, but I do think the weakest arc is NoHo Hank by the end of season 4, because I don't think the series really showed his self-preservation in the same way it showed Barry's or like his other like devious like cowardice. When I think the whole Hank's a pretty ballsy guy. I do get there is that end of season 3 he would be traumatized, but like I don't think what he does is bad. Like, well, what he does is bad, but like what the show does with him, I don't think it's bad. I just don't think it's as good as like Gene or Sally's or my favorite character, who I was so shocked he was my favorite character by the very last episode. Fuchs becomes my favorite character, which is just
Mm.
amazing. Any
Oh,
characters that you guys like?
I'd,
uh,
I'd probably go with so it's interesting when we're talking about something interesting with Barry is how the arcs play out. And I think Barry has a unique perspective on character arcs and character change. If you look at, say, Breaking Bad, that's a show about a man who um, I mean, you could argue whether or not how he was at the beginning of the show, but I think that's a clear case of a show where the character slowly changes. He slowly gets worse and worse and worse as the show goes on. Tony Soprano is a character who the comedy of that show is the fact that his constant attempts to change. He kind of gets close. Like sometimes he'll have these
Yeah.
like little mini epiphanies, but then he'll immediately backtrack on them, and that's kind of where the comedy of that show happens.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting with Barry is that its view of how character change happens is, and I think I think it's the most like uh, true to life, as sad as it is, and that is people really don't change that much. Throughout the first 3 or 4, even 4 seasons of the show, if I'm thinking of Barry or Sally or Fuchs or Cousineau, these are characters who continuously just do the same thing over and over and over again. They just keep fucking up. They keep doing the same mistakes. They keep falling victim to the same Achilles heel that they have. And it's only at the end of the show when they've really hit rock bottom that's the characters. The one I'm really talking about is Fuchs.
Yeah, of course.
Where throughout the entire show he's like this stubborn jackass who like I love Barry. It's like I hate him, and he just can't make up his mind, and he'll have it good, but then he wants revenge, or then he sees a chance to get back
Yeah.
into the game. But then it's that speech at the very end where he says, I always thought I was a good person and I could change, But it was in that moment where I was like getting my ass kicked every day, and I had nothing left. Where I finally just stopped the bullshit.
Yeah, he was a poser, as he said, because he likes to think of himself as this like hardened criminal in the first 3 seasons. But all he can really do in the first 3 seasons is talk.
Yeah,
He doesn't really have a lot, and he'll talk and he'll sink to levels that most people won't. But like, it's his pet. Like, if you could just drop this Fuchs, you can be happy. There is a very odd running gag of when Fuchs meets a woman, they'll usually instantly fall in love with him.
yeah, that was hilarious.
And even before, like in season 1, he's like, I know this Cherokee gal, she's wild, but there's the Chechen woman, there's the Mexican woman, there's the barista, which is a very odd running gag to have.
They kept like the running joke is like he's like it's almost like I think someone was like a comment or something. They were like, it's like God is telling him to like, hey, you should move to like the Chechnya countryside and become a goat farmer.
Mhm.
That's what'll make you happy. But he keeps like, no, like I gotta go back.
Yeah. Fuchs' arc is incredible and he does somewhat get a happy ending but it's only because Fuchs ends up after getting beaten and losing everything basically in prison. And once he comes out, he's honest with himself and he's able to acknowledge the truth, unlike like Barry's been denying the truth this whole time. But Fuchs is honest and he does the right thing for once when it comes to uh, Barry's son, John. Of not only does he save John, but he shields his eyes from the violence as he like walks him away from the massacre scene. And that scene, Fuchs has held a gun before. He's held a gun on 2 different occasions, but that's the one time Fuchs has actually shot a gun, and it's in self-defense. So, yeah, that was just a moment that just, oh god, on rewatch, it's just better and better and better. Yeah.
And
Josh, sorry.
Sorry, just a fob. And then you have Sally, who I think is also a case of a character who she had like a chance. I think it's season 3 when she breaks up with Barry. That's like a moment where she kind of like comes to, but then she backslides and keeps falling deeper and deeper. But for me, in the finale, that's really where, when she admits to John the truth and she finally has like her big breakdown. That I think was her Fuchs' moment, where it was the moment where she realized just how far she has let things go. And like this is the moment I really need to change. Right. Finally. But
and she's fine being an acting teacher for a high school, and she no longer seeks big validation, because when that man asks her if she wants to go out to drink, she just like, no, I'm fine, and she's happy. It's a bittersweet ending, but
I think particularly that scene was more about her being able to set boundaries.
Of course,
it was good. The fact that like it's funny because when you watch that scene, it almost comes off as like, and I feel like I'm sure that a lot of guys will view it like that. It's like, well, shouldn't she have been nicer? Like, shouldn't she have just been like, oh, I have to late night? It's like, well, no, it's because she doesn't know
him.
Yeah, she just said no, and it's like she didn't say it in a mean way. She didn't say it in a bitchy way. She just said nope, and he took it gracefully and he walked away. Because I feel like, particularly like a woman in that situation, they should feel the pressure to be like, oh, when I have a late night, or like like really like tiptoe around it. The fact that she was just very direct, she wasn't like mean or rude about it. She was just very direct. I think that was a really big step for her.
Yeah, the dude bro syndrome of these shows could be kind of infuriating. But yeah, Josh, Josh, characters you like, character arcs you like in the show?
Yeah, I'm like all really of the characters, I think great supporting cast. I'm surprised to hear you think Sally had a good ending. I'm surprised it happy. I don't know. I think she's still somewhat the same person she was in a way, like, still somebody who said she's not craving validation. Because I think that scene where like her son comes up to her and, he says, he loves her, and then her immediate reaction is like, well, how was the play? Not I love you back, was how the play was, and so, yeah, so I think, with her ending, it's always like, yeah, I think, it's a long road for her. But yes, I mean, it's a really great, strong supporting cast. Everybody, Henry Winkler, Stephen Root. There was a moment where I just hated Stephen Root's character as much as Barry, because he's one of those Weasley type characters that just always kind of gets away. And then as much as he kind of just waffled back and forth between hating Barry and then supporting Barry and then everything like that. Because in some situations he exacerbates it. He makes things worse, and then that causes a lot of things. Sometimes he can just retire and just go like, hey, this is the life for you, just settle down. But no, he just keeps going, and that just kind of makes things worse. But yeah, I mean, strong cast from everybody all around. So that's also makes a great show too when you have such a good supporting cast. I can't think of a weak link in it.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the ending because that's what I want to talk about next. The ending of Barry and like just why I think this is one of the best endings to a TV show just in years. One that goes out on its own accord as well. Of Barry's fate. So Barry's fate is basically like I think of this as like almost like the evolution of like Tony's fate in The Sopranos, or like an anti Breaking Bad like fate, where it's just like, no, we're not going to give you fan service to this character. Bill Hader has even talked about that with like he wanted originally NoHo Hank's death was going to be a bit more sweet and a bit more like remember the good times, but he's like, no, we can't do that. It's going to kind of not wreck the story, will taint it a bit, but like where Barry kind of finally comes to that realization and then gets shot. And not only does he get shot, but he just dies like immediately. And something I thought was really interesting, especially when you compare it to Walt's death in Breaking Bad. When Walt dies, the whole show is from his perspective. So it's like the show ends with him, and as the camera like pulls out, it's very much centering like Walt in the middle. So this is still Walt's story.
Yeah.
When Barry dies, he's just on the couch to the side as the camera focuses on Gene, and just like the empty face he has. It's like, yeah, Barry's not the hero of the story or the protagonist of the story. He's the villain, which I thought was just such a brilliant ending. Uh, your guys' thoughts on the ending?
I think what's so brilliant about the show is that it really up until like literally the last maybe 10 minutes of the show, I think it's pushing a very clear message in terms of, which is the idea that in order to really facilitate true change, you have to be honest with yourself. That is kind of, I think, the core of the show. Like that's what Barry never did. That's what Sally never did. That's what Fuchs never did. That's what Hank really ended up actually never doing.
Yeah.
That's kind of why the other characters eventually came to even Cousineau in a way. I think by killing Barry, that was sort of his like, I've had enough moment, and he was just done. Like it was like, even if this like fucks my life up, I'm so done with this. And it was weird. It was a strange. It was a very strange, dark resolution to his arc, but it was the moment where he finally like he put his ego aside in a way. He put his sort of like his own self-centeredness for a second. I mean, like him killing Barry was out of selfishness, like he hated him, but him doing so, I think, was him finally like having enough. He finally gave up on his life in a way. And now, granted, that's pretty. It's very dark, similar with Fuchs, where he's like, I accepted who I am, but now I'm like a psychotic criminal.
Mm-hmm.
But it is kind of in line with the theme of the show, where all the characters are like, they have to be honest with themselves. You have to own up to what you've done, and then no matter what is on the other side, that will lead to change. But if you don't, you're just going to be doing the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
But then what's really interesting is that the show, in that moment where Barry is about to have his epiphany, it's robbed from him. He's killed. It's almost if the show was saying, even though Barry was able to come to this realization, he isn't owed, and perhaps he doesn't even deserve the opportunity to change. Like that could have been the moment where he turned things around, and maybe he turned himself in, and maybe it would have led to a life where maybe he would able to look John in the face and tell him about what happened. But the show robs that from him. But then in the final scene, the show almost undercuts the points trying to make purposely, like not like accidentally, like it's very purposeful, where how are we supposed to feel about the ending where John is served up this lie of his father, this complete fabrication of who his father was and what he did?
Yeah.
But at that final shot where he smiles, PFC Barry Berkman, one of the best final lines I think of any show ever. PFC Barry Berkman was buried in that Arlington National Cemetery with full honors. Like probably one of the best final lines of any show ever. And John smiles. And so the question the show is asking us in this show that has all been about like the truth and self-acceptance, it's like the show is asking us, is John better off with the lie? Is he going to be better off now, thinking of his father as this hero? Or would he have been better off knowing who his father really was?
Mhm.
And it's a strange, I think that's kind of why a lot of people didn't like the ending, because it's almost as if the ending is sort of subverting what the point it was trying to make. But I think that's the brilliance of it. The show is almost, instead of giving like this is the theme of the show, guys, it's almost asking us again, this is pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
But is it almost a better alternative? Is it almost, and is it saying something about, media and TV and movies and stories of just, is it better to believe a lie if it leads to better outcomes? And the show never really gives a definite answer, but it presents the question.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting that throughout the show, Barry has had somewhat of a criticism on U.S. military culture. Albert that we see, well, first of all, Barry is Barry, like a psychotic murderer who's a former Marine.
Yes.
Taylor's like the worst kind of dude bro Punisher fan who's just like a violent asshole who just wants to kill people. Albert, even though we see him kind of sympathetic later, not only does he like jump for glee when Barry's able to kill that guy, but he's pretty like kind of casually racist of like, he took out a sheep fucker. Even Janice's father, Jim, was that his name? Jim Moss. From what we know, he's well versed in torture and he's convinced people to like commit suicide. So he's not like an amazing person either. And the fact that now the last episode kind of like frames this is what true crime is, of stuff like because of like how we view the US military and stuff like that, and like the conversation over there of like kind of the excuses that people in America will make. Barry's going to be viewed in a more favorable light than Gene Cousineau. Gene's not a great person, but he's not a monster. But who's now the public story is that Gene Cousineau manipulated Barry into killing Janice. So, yeah, which I found really dark. But yeah.
Yeah, well, it's funny too, because even in season 2, there's the moment where Barry is recapping his first kill, and when the actors act out the scene, they're crying and they're like, "Oh, I killed someone." They're like, "It's okay, man." Like he's feeling very remorseful, but then it cuts to what actually happened, and him and his comrades were like, "Fuck yeah, bro, you did it. You killed that goat fucker." And I think that is that's another instance of, it echoes the final scene of, we as a nation, we like to think of warfare or like soldiers, or like the mystique we've built around soldiers, this idea that like, they're good men who are serving their country and they feel remorseful. Like we see this all the time in like war movies, like they kill people, but then they're like, there's a close-up shot of their crying and like the tear coming down. And yeah, Barry's basically saying it's like, well,
Not
no,
always.
that's not actually always what happens. Some of these guys are very unhinged. Some of these, or there's military culture, like you said, this idea that that moment where Barry makes his first kill, it should be framed as this thing where it's like, that's where I became corrupted.
Yeah.
And yet, in Barry's perspective, it was the best moment of his life.
Yeah, Barry even describes that as that was the best day of my life.
Yeah.
Because, Barry likes approval. He likes recognition. He's a lot like a child in a lot of ways. Josh, your thoughts on the ending?
Really good ending. I thought, and it's hard, with a lot of these shows, nailing the ending is tough. We've seen that time and time again. With series finales, it's like, okay, how are you going to land this thing? And I think it did a good job with that. And that's always good when a great show has a good ending to it. And like you talked about how it frames Barry's death, like I said, it fits in line with the show. Like, he doesn't have like some glamorous, death, like maybe saw something like the end of Breaking Bad, where it's the slow motion zoom out with the music playing in the background. It's just like he was just that quick. He went, oh, and then boom. It was
Wow.
just that it. You know what I mean?
Oh,
It was
wow.
just that. Yeah. So he just went out just like that. And the fates, a lot of the different characters, I think that made sense of what happened. And I like that a lot. Again, Stephen Root's character being, hey, the Weasley guy's always gonna get away. He got away. That's just the fate of him. And Sally's, I thought fate was good. And then, as Macari mentioned with John, the son, you always love a good way you can interpret things differently. The smile at the end, is it that my co-host, he had a good theory on it, and we talked about it when we reviewed it. Is it he knows that the story's bullshit, that he's watching it, the movie, and then he's smiling because of that, or is he smiling because he has this good story of his dad, and then he's able to, kind of live with that? So there's different ways you can interpret that, and that's always really good when you can argue about that in a good way, when the show ends.
Or maybe like, this John, maybe because like my interpretation is that like he believes it, that's who he believes. But then you could also argue that maybe there's like part of his mind that like maybe that's not how it went down. Like maybe there is some shit I remember from when I was a kid, but maybe I'm just going to accept the story as It's funny, this is such a weird connection. Have you guys ever seen or read the book Life of Pi?
Yes, I have.
So the ending is kind of similar to that, where so basically, spoilers for Life of Pi. Basically, it's a story about this kid he's on a ship with his family, and the ship is wrecked, and he winds up on a dinghy with 3 other animals: an orangutan, a tiger, and
A wolf,
or like a hyena or something like that. And so it's like this journey about how him and the tiger, who were they end up being the ones left, they are able to make it to shore, and it's a whole thing of survival, yada yada yada. And at the end, he's talking to these 2 detectives who he's recapping, or they're naval investigators of the shipwreck, and he's recapping the tale, and they're like, we don't believe this. This is like too spectacular and too remarkable. And then he tells a second story, which I won't spoil it because it's really good. But let's just say it's a second um, set of events, if you will, that is a lot more. It's a lot darker, but it's a lot more plausible, I guess. Like it's a lot more something that we as humans would buy into. And at the end, we find out that from the 2 stories, the investigators ended up going with the first one, with him and the tiger, the one that's like this very fantastical journey. And to your point, Josh, I think that's kind of what we could argue from the ending. Where is John actually like? Is he actually like? Does he actually buy this, or would he rather just believe this because it's more comforting? He would rather see his father, even if he doesn't believe that's who his father was. Would I rather believe that's who he was? And is that? And then again, the question that the ending is proposing is like, is that a bad thing? Is that? And again, it's kind of weird because the entire show is about like accepting who you are and like not BSing about who you are as a person. But then the ending is asking the question, well, are there cases where that's okay? Like, is the ending asking a question? Is it being bitter? And I think it's brilliant, but I think a lot of people, because it didn't give like that straight answer, that straight like moral lesson,
it's
they were
dumb.
like,
why did they kill the assassin like that?
Yeah,
Should have been machine gun.
very silly.
Yeah. Barry's a Marine. Just why is he unconfident? Sorry, I've seen a few videos that have got me very mad about like, oh, you didn't get the point at all.
What was the one that you point out where it was like
suddenly
Barry's so unconfident, but he was a Marine, so we should be confident, or something
it's like,
weird
but
like
suddenly he's a beta male, and it's like, oh my god. Yeah, but yeah, now I want to talk about Barry the character, how he's written, and how he's compared to other uh like kind of characters that like on the surface you would compare him to, because I I'm 99% confident that Bill Hader and like Alec Berg went into this like no like thinking we want to avoid the traditional Walter Whites or like the Dexters and stuff like that. And like, why do you think Barry himself kind of avoids the problem that a lot of anti-heroes have of like overly sympathizing with them or stuff like that, or like indulging in the violence? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
You want to go ahead, or you want me to?
I can go, Josh. I can speak after.
So I think a character Barry compares to in media a little bit, like is like Joe from You a little bit, in
Mm.
terms of, and I compare him to him a little bit because I think Joe from You got wrapped up in he's an anti-hero discourse, but he's not really an anti-hero, and people kind of sympathizing with him, even though that Penn Badgley had to come out and say like you're not supposed to like this guy, you know what I mean, and you're not supposed to really feel for him. Like this dude is supposed to, this is a bad guy who does bad things, stalks women and and kills people and everything. So there's really nothing sympathetic about him. And I think that's what kind of what Barry was a little bit of, you can understand somebody's story, like you understand Barry and what made Barry Barry, but that doesn't mean necessarily that
Yeah.
you have to, excuse his actions, or you see where he's coming from, but it doesn't mean you have to excuse it. So I think it's a little bit like that. And I think where he kind of veers off amongst other kind of characters, like with Walter White, where people still have that love for Walter White and all the things he did and excuse his actions, and why there's almost all that huge vitriol towards Skylar is because of that huge love because of Walter White. I think where it goes is like, you explicitly see him do a lot of terrible stuff, in the show, and it's out, and like I said, there's really not a whole lot of redeeming qualities about Barry. Like from Breaking Bad, you can see like, okay, well, Walter White is like he's doing it for his family, and
Has all
you
these
had that kind of,
excuses.
he's got a little, a lot of that motivation. But eventually, it's like Barry. I don't think he has none of that going for him. So it's just like, from right at the gate, it's just like, okay, there's really not a whole lot of reason why he's kind of doing what the things that he's doing. So I think it does that a lot. And then, and I think the way the writing is set up,
Yeah.
of illustrating that point is really great.
Have
So
you seen Better Call Saul?
yes.
Okay, well, yeah, there's a point I want to talk about where I think, like, I do think Better Call Saul does kind of do what it's able to handle its main protagonist a bit better and like not give him and out that much time. But like in the last season where we see that flashback to uh when Jimmy was Saul and with Walt, we see Walt from Jimmy's point of view, and it's the only time we see Walt from anyone else's point of view. And Walt's a fucking asshole in that scene. He's annoying. He's like pedantic, and like Jimmy's just like trying to start like a friendly conversation, like, "Hey, if you had a time machine, what would you do with it?" He's like, "You're a fucking moron," and stuff like that.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, it's a tough wire to balance with this stuff because I do think we have been taking more of note of that as of late, but like it's a problem I have with a bunch of shows starring anti-heroes or like villain protagonists, or it's like how much does the camera frame them as like not even heroic, but like cool, and they usually at some level they give them like a moral point or like a moral high ground. This is a big problem I have with like the Punisher a lot of the time, or like Rick Sanchez, of like you're giving them too much right here. They're too, and it's like, but you're also portraying them as cruel. You're portraying them as cool, and they also get like moments of like man pain, if I think that's the word, of like, oh, others suffer and they feel bad, but they feel bad in private. So we know that it's almost like an excuse for their action. And I really respect that Barry just like, no, he doesn't have a tragic backstory or anything really. At worst, he's like his dad might have died, but like his dad might have died when he was like 20. We don't really see. Uh I do think like this is very much intentional because Bill Hader has talked about like Barry's like in his 40s by the time we meet him, like he's a full grown adult. So he has
Mhm.
to take some responsibility for his actions. Mac, your thoughts?
Um, it's I think it has to do, at least from my perspective, more with aesthetic. Um, there's sort of this idea that I'm trying to put this correctly? Or here, I can use an example. One time I did a video on Tony Soprano, The Sopranos, and someone referred to Tony as badass. And I think I responded to him. It's like, well, I wouldn't call him badass. He does a lot of fucked up. He's very, what's I'm looking for? Emotionally stunted. He's very hypocritical. He's very, quick to anger. He's not like really an alpha male. He's kind of like a big baby.
Yeah.
But then someone said that the person responded and is, initially I thought it was kind of silly, but in honesty, in retrospect, I kind of understood what he was saying. It's like, yeah, but he still does really like badass things. There are like, it's like where he, faces off of Johnny Sack, or, he, there are certain scenes in it that do kind of highlight that he is sort of like this
Capable
take charge.
mobster.
He's capable. He's like, he stands up for himself and others and people around him.
Yeah.
And what I kind of learned from that interaction was that I think they're like a character's like major direct actions or how they're framed in certain scenes speaks a lot more than sort of like the undercurrent. So for example, Breaking Bad in season 4, it's, Walt versus Gus the entire season.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Now, the undercurrent of that whole thing is that it's this, Walt put himself in this situation. It was because of his own like stupid hubris that got him into this situation. Gus, frankly, has every reason to want to kill Walter, and he probably should. And yet throughout, and Walt ends up doing horrible things in order to take Gus down. But when you kind of step back and are watching it, you can kind of get caught up in
The drama.
this sort of like the drama, or like the the face off, as as it is coined, of Walt taking out Gus. So even if you look back on it and they're like, in retrospect, yeah, Walter is kind of a piece of shit during all this, and this isn't something where he's like the hero. It is, that last moment when Skylar calls him and he says, "I won." There is a level of
coolness to it.
Or like satisfaction or like catharsis to it. And I think it's difficult when you're making a television show, is you have to be conscious of what is the underlying message you want to put out versus how you're portraying the character in certain situations. And I think this is an issue, particularly the ending of Breaking Bad really fell into, where it really kind of, at least for me, it really lost the plot, where the ending kind of is antithetical to the entire show. But then we have a show like Barry, where as the show goes on, Barry he never really comes off as a badass. He either comes off as psychotic or petty or socially inept. And it only gets worse as the show goes on, very explicitly. There's never really a moment where, like, even the massacre at the end of season 2, where Barry's like killing all the Chechens, that didn't come off to me as like a fuck yeah, this is awesome. Look how badass Barry is. And not at all. It showed me that like, oh wow, this guy's actually completely psychotic. There's that great moment where even if you want to think that in that moment Barry is like really cool, like, oh look, he's killing all the Chechens, they purposely throw in the scene where he kills
Mayhek,
the kid who looked up to him. I think they did that on purpose to kind of, hey, if you think Barry is cool for doing this, or if you think that he's in the right for doing this, that one moment is like, never mind. No, see, he's not.
I'm glad you bring that up, Matt, because I wanted to bring up that scene. But like, a lot of people, especially some of the fans, forget that wasn't a fight. Barry went into a monastery of gangsters, but they were just like hanging out with a gun. Everyone else was unarmed, and he just started shooting people because he was mad at Fuchs. He could have just waited until like Fuchs was like gone, but he didn't, because he's an irrational, unstable person.
Yes.
And Barry kills 50 people. Like, he kills every Chechen except for 3. He kills everyone in the Burmese mafia, like everyone. He kills everyone in the Bolivian mafia except for Cristobal. It's like Barry had to kill like 50 people that in like an hour. And the thing was, most of them were unarmed. And Maybach, like, even like he was like ready with the gun, but it's like, when he saw Barry, he thought it was like his trainer, like his friend. He's like, "Oh, it's Barry." Then Barry just shoots him in the head with like zero hesitation. It's it's wild.
Yeah, the show never gets. The show at no point ever flirts with the idea that Barry is somehow like some cool dude or does badass shit. And even when he does stuff like that, it particularly in the depiction of the violence, like as we said, like so for example, I could see an alternate version of the scene in episode 1 where he shoots NoHo Hank and kills the other two. I could see like a scene where they like, Barry ducks behind a car and like, does a roll or something and like does like a cool like twist move. Like, they could do that. But I think what the point, like, and that's why, Bill Hader and Attenborough, they were so careful, was like all the violence is very sort of matter of fact. It's not like cool. It's just kind of pop. It's over. Yeah.
Yeah. Josh, your thoughts?
Speaking about like a lot of anti-heroes, from Tony Soprano to Walter White, like I said, what makes, kind of Barry a little bit different in the way they kind of handle things. It's like, usually those guys, family was big with them, or then you have some characters who have like a code, like Omar. I see you got him on the tier list here from The Wire. Like he had a code. It's like, I only hunt people in the game. I don't hunt other people. I don't go out hunting innocent people. I hunt people in the game. And when you have a character that you're trying to follow, that's, you're trying to push, it's like, this is a bad person. Like I remember I watched Macabre's video on The Northman. And he was talking about the lead character there, Alexander Skarsgård. And then going into the movie, I heard people talk about it and review it and saying like, okay, you're following a really, kind of evil person here, but you're really not, because, he is a Viking and he does a lot of plundering. And then, if you know what Vikings did, when they did a lot of plundering and a lot of violence out of war, I mean, you see them, kill people, but usually they're people that, are trying to, defend themselves and everything. So it's kind of like a fair fight a little bit, but you don't see him do all the other stuff that you see the other Vikings do, burning down the homes and, taking the women and children and things. So, when you like, I think Barry really shows like a very villainous character, more than I've seen in a while. Of just that this guy's got no redeeming qualities to him. Like nothing you can really latch on to. It's like at least he's got that. Like at least with Tony Soprano, it's like he's got family. It's like okay, at least he cares about his family, loves his family.
He loves Meadow. Yeah. We know that. Meadow's his baby girl. But yeah, I think text is also very, very important and like context to these characters. And I don't want to be a stick in the mud. Like, no, there are like over the top violent movies that I love. That like, yeah, hell yeah, let's do it. Let's have action. Not everything has to be a dissection of it. But like, if you want to have commentary on a certain aspect or like critique violence or critique like a character's actions, then your main character, like you have to frame them in the right way. You can't just like let them get away because they're the main character. And I think Omar works as well as like most characters in The Wire, because almost every character in The Wire gets got. Almost everyone just loses. It's just an awful, like, violent game. I did read an article not too long ago by Idris Elba was talking about basically he regrets making Stringer Bell so cool because there's a bunch of like young men who like really idolize Stringer Bell and like think he's like, hell yeah, we gotta be smart with this stuff. It's like,
it really?
Yeah, really. Really.
But the whole point of his character was
he died.
Well, not even that, but the entire last episode is that he tried to, I'm gonna be a good businessman, but then he gets fucked over by Clay Davis, and then his immediate instinct is to go up to Slim and be like, hey, we have to kill him. Yeah. He like it really shows that this guy who thinks he was super astute and tactful was actually just a gangster in a suit the entire time.
You just never was because Idris Elba is a handsome man. So the filmmaking of Barry, someone brought up in the comment section. I think this is why season 3 just became season 1 and 2 are especially very, very good, but season 3 just kind of skyrocketed for me because they experiment a lot more with like filmography and stuff like that, and like just really experimental shots they did. Like usually it used to be shot was shot well, but it was shot like in the kind of a conventional way. But here we get more like lucid dream and drug sequences of like when Barry's poison and he's like hallucinating. One of my favorite shots is just when he walks in his mind, where he like thinks he walks out of a house, but he sees like a beach, and it's like him kind of visualizing purgatory. And the way that transition is done is just like amazing.
Oh yeah, that was really cool. When
Yeah.
it's like he's walking and then it kind of just forms into it. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's all good. Are there any, other than the finale, are there any standout episodes you guys like? Or
I kind of view the show as almost like I mean, it's kind of a shorter show. I think like in total it's only 16 hours in total, roughly.
Yeah, something like that.
Because I almost view the show as just like almost like one single unit, or like almost like a mini series. I don't even really consider it like an episode. If I had to pick one, I guess I would say of all of them, it's a very contrarian opinion, but I really do like Tricky Legacies, which is the episode right
Season
after the
4.
flash forward in season 4, where we it establishes their new life. I think that's probably one of the more controversial episodes of the show, particularly for people who are not fans of the ending. But I think it really, to take a risk like that, is not only is that incredibly ballsy, but I also love how it sort of, particularly with the how they add in the religious aspect to it, and Barry kind of getting into God and Christianity and stuff, and just how, but of course in the context it isn't of hey, this is a person who is actually trying to seek penance. He's just trying to find a new vehicle in order to make himself feel better about what he's done.
Yeah, Barry. Yeah, I remember that scene where he was talking to John. That episode had a lot of laughs for me, where he was going over like famous historical figures who are viewed as great men. He's like, then he brings up like all this shit. Yeah, but it's clear him watching YouTube videos of stuff just to learn. It's like, I'm not saying you can't get information from that, but there's a good chance you might get wrong information from that. He's like, see, even good people do bad things.
It's such a strange. It's him projecting his own insecurities onto his son. It's like Abraham Lincoln. Yeah, he kind of did some fucked up shit, bro. Like, not everyone's a good guy. But what's so funny about that too is like, at that point, John doesn't know anything bad about Barry, so it's just Barry doing it for his own self gratification, I guess.
It's there was also a scene that I don't know why it made me laugh, of like they're in the middle of nowhere and Barry just goes, "Look at everything God has given us," and there's just like nothing around them. Yeah. I don't know why that makes me laugh.
Also, this is I've never actually seen anyone else mention this, but I think this is like very on purpose. And you guys can tell me if you agree or disagree. So the entire ending where, Barry is, he's shot by Jean, and that's where he dies in this very uncelebratory manner. Jean was supposed to, the fact that he had the white beard and white hair, that was supposed to sort of emulate him being, because you could argue that Cousineau up until season 4 was sort of Barry's god, if you will. He was sort of his ultimate father figure. He was his ultimate paternal figure who he was constantly looking to for approval. This is the person I dedicate my life to try and to find redemption. But then in season 4, we cut to 8 years later, and he's talking about it's God now. But of course, we know that's just a ruse. He doesn't actually care about Christianity or religion. He's just using it as a device. But then that final scene where Cousineau shoots him, he literally looks like God. He has the white hair and the white beard. And it's just so funny to me that it's literally just in this moment, Barry finally reaches his epiphany where he's about to do the right thing and finally get on the road to change. But at that point, it's literally just, it's almost as if God is like coming into the screen and being like,
no,
you know what? Fuck you. No, we're not doing this. You've done so much shit. You don't deserve this. Bye.
Yeah, it's funny because Gene says he was in Israel doing like spiritual like stuff. So double thing. Josh, episodes you're a fan of?
Let me see. I love the episode. Was that the episode that McCarver was talking about? I think it was towards like where they do the time skip where we
Yeah.
saw that
Mhm.
Anthony Kerrigan he went to Dave and Buster's. Was that the same episode? Where
The bestest place in the world, or
That was
Yeah.
so that was before
that
that
was
was the
before?
intro of season 4 when him and Cristobal are setting up their the sand operation. But no,
Yeah.
that was when they're walking around the circle and then he has to run the catch up because they
Yeah.
choreographed it.
Barry's in prison. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
I thought that was a really good episode. I thought the episode where he was training like the Chechkins, where he's doing that. I thought that was a good episode. You saw some more insight there with him.
that's one of
Uh,
my. That's a joke I'm very fond of, where like there's the translator for him, and they're like, "We fucking speak English, bro." Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, those will just be some of my
Yeah.
favorite episodes there.
I think one of my second favorite episode or the was the fourth. It's the episode where Barry yells at Sally of season 3.
Mhm. He
Because
yells at her in episode 2.
episode 2,
Yeah.
yeah, and the one where it's with Gene, where he's just. I think it's the reason I love that so much is because now we see what Barry is really like. That we like season 3 is just like he's not pretending anymore. This is what Barry is like as a person. This is
Mhm.
like just how bad he is, and that it was a very intense scene where he just yelled at Sally, and just how it opens up on her, like being so bright and happy, like, "Oh, you want to learn about writing, kids? Super easy," and stuff like that. That Barry just comes in. It's like, you think it's gonna be like a wacky exchange, like in season 1, but Sally says something. She says, "We're saying the same thing," and it just like triggers Barry. He's like, "We're not," and he just pins her against the wall, basically, as he just like yells at her in public. And what just made it so sad for me was later on where we see where Barry calls Sally at home. Sally's preparing him dinner, and just like she probably did with Sam, because she's like an abuse victim. And but the thing is, she's preparing him dinner of like a donut, a beer, and like Portillo's food. And she's like buying him a controller. Like she's basically trying to like appeal to a child at this point. Is but then we
You're appeasing a
yeah.
bratty child,
Oh
basically.
yeah, yeah. And then we see Barry like no, this is what Barry does. It's like where he's at Gene's son's place at his house, and his eyes are just like wide open. He's like, "Look, if you don't do what I say, this one and that one go away." It's like, "Oh, this is our protagonist, the biggest psychopath on the planet." Like
Yes.
and then he's crying. It's because I found Barry creepy up until that point, but I never found him like frightening. But like there, it's like, oh, something's fucked with Barry's mind. Like this guy is like dangerous.
Or
Slapping himself in the head.
there's another good scene where it's in season 4, I think episode 3, where he calls NoHo Hank to get him to kill Kuzuno. And at this point, Hank knows that Barry is working with the FBI. And so he's kind of stringing him along. And then at the end, he's like,
I've been nothing but nice to you.
yeah, that was funny too. It's like you tried to kill him twice, but like in Hank's mind, he was a good friend. But it's like, so why are you working with the FBI? And then immediately Barry, who up until this point was like being nice, like, hey Hank, hey, he just turns on a dime. Like as soon as he doesn't get what he wants, he's like, "I'm gonna kill you." It's like, do it. I'm a good person. Like he's in such deep denial of who he is, even at that, even after being caught. It's like it's over. It's done. You're caught. You're going to jail for the rest of your life. And even then, he still can't. And then there are still some moments where that scene where he's in his the cell and the cop comes up and is trying to be nice to him and he's like, "I'm a cop killer. I'll kill you and your mother too." And that's a moment where he's
looking at the camera, telling the audience, "I'll kill you if I see you walking down the street."
But again, that's even a moment where it's like, it's almost not even sincere in a way. He's almost like punishing himself because again, right before that, he's like hitting himself in the head, like stupid, stupid, stupid. Even when he's being quote unquote honest or showing his true self. He's not even doing it consciously. And it's such a weird. That's such a surreal experience to the fact that we only saw a different Barry. It was right before Gene shot him, and he has that moment where he goes, "I see," and then he asks him to call the cops. We only see a different Barry, a changed Barry, for maybe like 15 seconds total throughout the entire show. That was the moment where he decided to make things right and to change, but 15 seconds later he's dead, and we never actually get to see how that would have turned out.
Yeah. It's really, all that stuff in the prison was just like really good and just pretty disturbing. Especially where it's after the reporter comes and tells him we're making a piece on like a true crime based on Gene Cousineau, and like his life tells you apart. And in Barry's mind, despite killing his girlfriend, because he got him a part in the role, he's like, "We're fucking even. I saved your life. Why are you doing this to me?" It's just like a very like terrifying, terrible villain of like you could make basically a horror movie with just Barry as the main villain as this. Yeah. That's why I think Barry's one of the best portrayals of like a villain protagonist or anti-hero main character, like problematic main character is like I think the only one I can really say with certainty who's done maybe a bit better is Rusty Venture, who I kind of like say is like the anti Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty. Like he's the perfect deconstruction of like the brilliant but sad person.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think of anti-hero portrayals, and are there any recent ones you think are done well? Problematic main lead portrayals, or like do you think we're at a good place because we are getting more like commentary on that, or do you think like we're still at a point where like problematic main characters will still come off as like power fantasies to a degree?
I think it's hard because at this point, and I'm guilty of this in my own channel, I think what an anti-hero has kind of lost a lot of meaning. An anti-hero, I think probably the best depiction of what an actual anti-hero is Jimmy McGill from Better Call Saul.
Yeah.
With the caveat, but probably only in the first like 3 seasons, or even like probably like the first season. I think is where we get the most, where he's like, he's putting forth the sand. Yeah, he's putting forth the Sandpiper settlement, and I think that's where we get the most. And because the entire point of anti-hero is that you still want to root for them, you still want them to be like good people, that you still want them to succeed, because their ultimate goal is righteous, but they're just using sort of like tricky means to get there. And I'm even looking at your list on it. Maybe I think House in a way is probably a good.
Right.
I'd probably rank him higher than.
I think the only thing is that like some of the later seasons kind of really indulge in House.
Yeah, later seasons House up until like season I think like 3 or 4 it was.
Yeah, it has been a while since I've watched it, so I just went off memory. But like even when I was making this list, I'm like, are some of these technically anti-heroes? Like, is Crowley really an anti-hero, or is he just a good guy who's kind of a dick at times?
Yeah, I think Vic Mackey, I don't think he's an anti-hero. I think
this was also a villain protagonist in general. So.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of the issue where I think the term anti-hero has kind of lost its meaning, where it's like it sort of also crosses over into any character who has any protagonist that has any sort of like moral dubiousness.
I mean, you got people calling Homelander anti-hero.
Yeah, exactly. Like that is, I think that's a perfect illustration of how the term.
But he's handsome. How can he be bad?
Yeah. Or even you could even argue Billy Butcher or the boys are anti-heroes in the sense that what they're doing, or at least initially, is. But then again, the show illustrates that what they're doing isn't really for the. They're not doing it to be like super righteous. They're doing it for their own like personal grievances. And again, yeah, I think what an actual anti-hero has almost completely lost the plot. It's almost to the point where I think like with like I'm looking at your list, like Rick Sanchez. I think there are certain episodes where he is an anti-hero, and then other episodes where he most certainly is not. Overall, I probably
Yeah.
wouldn't say he is.
I think it's also the problem of just like episodic stuff of like because Rick is always also he's usually framed as the funniest, coolest character who always has a point. Like he always almost has like a moral standing, and like a lot of people I think this is why I like Jimmy and like Rusty and Barry so much is that because like unlike them, like a lot of these anti-heroes go up against people who are like or like even villain protagonists to a degree go up against people who are worse than them. Like who Walt's enemies in Breaking Bad, they're drug dealers, they're killers, they're like neo-Nazis and stuff like that. Jimmy is
Mm.
just kind of going up against like white collar labor guys, like lawyers and stuff, or snobby people. And and Barry doesn't look good because after season one, his enemies pretty much just like his biggest enemies for the most part, like either Moss or Gene or just like Fuchs, but it's like it's not framed in like a cool way at all. Uh,
Yeah. Who's the woman next to Larry David?
oh, Rebecca from Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
it's it's like it's hero is a strong word, but like it's kind of like BoJack Horseman, Curb Your Enthusiasm thing, but it's like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is about Rebecca basically traveling halfway across the country to be with a guy to fulfill her love life, but then it's like, oh no, Rebecca, you're like clearly bipolar and have like some issues, and the show's very much it's very good at like just like nailing Rebecca's problems. I would
Yeah.
actually talk to someone. I was thinking of I would probably move Archer up because the show really just lets him have it. He like gets no like he rarely comes off as cool and like always gets his ass kicked, and he's just like this is what James Bond would look like if he was like an American and in the workplace.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think it's also kind of
oh,
insinuated like Archer may have like he's on the spectrum. I think a little bit.
a little definitely, uh, and yeah, it's usually stuff like that. And there's the gang from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, who are villain protagonists in a lot of ways, and they do have sympathetic motives, but it's like they're almost always in the wrong. They're almost never cool. They almost never succeed. So, uh, yeah, BoJack Horseman's done pretty well. Who I do think it is kind of a case of it. The show just going on a bit longer than most, and there is one scene where it's not even something BoJack does; it's something that's framed to him. Where it's like that kind of ruins the message of the show of like where BoJack basically gets sexually assaulted by a woman, but it's kind of portrayed in a cool manner by the woman. Like hell yeah,
Mm.
she just did that. It's like you're not supposed to grab someone's dick, you know that, right?
No.
Like go without their consent. But yeah, uh, I do hope. Just final thoughts on this is that I do hope with shows like Barry, Better Call Saul, and Venture Bros that we do get a more conscious portrayal of problematic main leads and not kind of avoid the power fantasy that comes with a bunch of them, especially when it comes to like having other characters be in pain because of not because of them, but have other characters' pain just be their fuel and motivation. Because I feel
Mm.
like that's very cheap in a lot of ways. Do you guys have any thoughts on that or any hopes for the future?
I think it's interesting. I almost part of me almost like wishes we do see a return to form of proper regular. I I think another maybe anti-hero that's a pretty good example is say like Wolverine or Logan from
Yeah,
X-Men. I think the issue I think that is like his characterization is sort of like the like kind of like the reluctant hero. He's a
a bit.
person who does have a moral compass. He does good, he strives to do good, but he kind of almost has to be like goaded into it. Like he's kind of like the, I just kind of don't want to. It's not my
Yeah,
problem, shit like that. Um, I because I think what's happened now is we've kind of gotten into an era where the anti-hero again has kind of lost all its meaning. I think Barry is not necessarily a return to form, but he's a deconstruction of the anti-hero. He's like an
yeah.
anti-hero.
Or at least the anti-hero of this caliber of like the crime depressed person.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, that we've been seeing a lot lately.
Yeah.
Actually, I want your guys' question because I've only seen the first season. Where would you rank Don Draper in this? Because I hear mixed things about him.
Um,
I mean, he does some good things. I mean, he's a complicated guy. I mean, there's situations where he has relationships with people and he cares about them. And McCarvey probably would know more, but because I've seen the show, I finished the show, but I don't remember too much from it. I remember there was a woman he knew before he took up his new name that he knew from his past that was pregnant, and he supported her and he paid for her and
Mm.
everything. And obviously, he has his trouble with alcohol and women. And there was a case where one of his coworkers, he discovered that he was gay, and he kept the dude secret.
Because
He
it's
didn't
like the
tell anybody.
40s.
Yeah, he kept it secret, but not just because it's like, okay, well, that's your business. I deal with that, but I'm not gonna it doesn't mean I like gay people at all. It just is like, okay, that's just not
Mm.
my business. But he's very morally gray. Yeah, and
Okay.
yeah,
I almost don't even know if I would class him as an anti-hero just because I don't really consider his story. When we're talking about, like, again, that's sort of the issue where when we're talking about a hero, I think House, again, I'm looking over this list and I almost wonder if of the shows I've seen, House kind of fits the bill the best because he, the way the stories are structured are he's trying to do, the ultimate goal is a good. It is to, save a person's life or cure them of a disease. But the way he goes about doing so can be really dodgy and you're not really agreeing. And two, there is this sort of like underpining of, does he actually, is his only desire to actually help this person, or is he kind of like, is there sort of like kind of another great example of a anti-hero, maybe the best now that I'm thinking of it, is who House is based off of, and that's Sherlock
Sherlock.
Holmes.
Oh yeah, I probably should put him on
This,
here.
the idea that he's a character who, I mean, like, there are some stories of Sherlock where he's not working for like a good reason, but for Sherlock, he's a character who is very obsessed with his own intellectual vanity.
Yeah.
And so even though he does good things, he isn't doing it necessarily for like, he's not doing it because right has to, like, there are certain elements, especially with House, where part of the good within him does shine out when he's making certain decisions. But there is a part of him where he's just doing this because he likes puzzles, because he has a compulsion to
Yeah.
do that. With Don Draper, I'm like, the issue with the show is that it's not really structured as like, there's no like ultimate goal that Don is striving for.
Just
It's more of
business.
it's more of just like a character study.
Okay.
I don't even know if I would refer to him as,
Right.
yeah, again, I think anti-hero has gotten,
I totally agree.
we've almost like, it's like, well, if you're the main character and you like kick a puppy once, you're an anti-hero.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of the thing when I bring up like anti-hero. Like, I don't mean like, someone who's like fighting crime and stuff, but like a problematic main character and stuff. But like, it's also like Wolverine an anti-hero, or is because sometimes like maybe it depends on the writer, but sometimes a lot of the time he's also just like kind of like your uncle who's like fun loving, but he's just like an asshole at times.
Yeah, but I think that's sort of like what the entire point of the anti-hero was originally, where
Okay,
he was
yeah.
just kind of like a person who was good, who strives to do the right thing and helps people and ends up being the hero, but he just kind of lacks, like, he's not like
Conventionally heroic trait, yeah.
yeah. But now we've gone so far into the weeds of our there are protagonist characters that do like horrible shit to the point where we're still like, but we're still rooting for them in a way sometimes, and we're like, are we, it's I
Yeah.
think almost the term anti-hero is so outdated because I almost wonder if the people whoever thought up the term didn't realize that, like, we were going to get characters like
Yeah.
Barry
Yeah.
or Tony Soprano
I
or
mean,
Nick
you
Mackey.
you also make the argument like in Infinity War, would you make the argument that Thanos is the anti-hero? Because in a lot of ways, it's from his point of view. He's essentially the protagonist of that story. And he thinks he's doing something righteous, but when in reality he's just like a psychopath. But it's like,
Yeah.
I know that I think that Thanos thinks that what he's doing is right, but it's like, yeah, it's a fine line to walk, and it's yeah,
I think this is gonna sound pretentious, but I think the issue is that the idea of an anti-hero kind of sits in the idea of like modernity and storytelling. This idea of like there's a good guy and a bad guy in stories,
yes, yeah.
and
I think that's my main problem with the term.
yeah, and it's kind of couched in like sort of like traditional modernist storytelling. But because so many of our shows and media today are sort of postmodern, where they're really this idea of like, again, like if you're watching Barry, it's like, oh, he's the hero. It's like, well, no, he's not the hero. You could argue he's the villain. Like Vic Mackey, is he the hero? It's like, well, he's not really the hero. Even, and some of the stories don't even fall into these sort of like, Better Call Saul is a tragedy. Better Call Saul, even The Sopranos, you could argue is a tragedy. So they some of these stories don't even really fit into the paradigm that anti-hero kind of is supposed to exist in. That's kind of why I brought it back to, Wolverine or House. These are stories that I think, for the most part, kind of rely on there is an ultimate good. There is a good outcome to the story, and that's what they're striving for.
I think the issue I also have with like a lot of writing when it comes to this stuff is like people just go, like when you critique, like if we the audience like critiques this stuff, like their actions and like how they're framed, they're like, well, they're the bad person, they're an anti-hero, doesn't mean everything they do is supposed to be squeaky clean. That means it's okay. This is a big problem with like South Park or like Rick and Morty or like 24. Like you gotta it's like, how does the camera frame it for the most part? You can't just say, well, they know they're a bad person, so that means they're good. Like stuff like that. Like that excuses any problem with writing. It's one of those things. I had like a 2-hour debate with someone on Discord about the ending of Breaking Bad, about how they said, well, it's okay because it was a tragedy. It's like, so that means his ending's okay. And we like went back and forth. But then they said something that made me realize, oh, this is just most fans' mindset of, they said, well, I don't care that's indulgent because I was entertained the whole time. So I'm like, I guess, but it's like, do you really want to consume art that way? Like if Walter White just came out and started juggling, like as long as you're entertained, is that okay?
Do you think it's with certain people, because some people watch a movie or a show and then go, like, I don't really like this person, not for writing reasons, it's just more for personality. Like, I don't see myself hanging out with this person or thinking like this person's cool, and then there was a movie that came out this year. I don't know if you saw it. It's called Shortcomings.
Oh,
And the main character in that he's a total dick, in every way possible. And I can see people definitely not liking him, but that's kind of the purpose of it, is he's a dick throughout the way, all the way through it, and like guys like Walter White, like is framed to be somebody cool, framed to be somebody like, I want to be him, and I want to be like him. Same thing with like Don Draper, he's a cool guy, good looking guy in his suit,
ridiculously handsome, just John Han handsome.
Yeah, so I think that helps a lot, in those cases. And then, some of these guys, I mean, you had like, when this conversation was like really huge, you had Sopranos was on the air and Breaking Bad was on the air, Madman was on the air, The Shield was on the air, The Wire was on the air.
Yeah.
Those are kind of your main figures. Now, I don't really, I mean, I guess Barry would be on that now. And then
we have you, but like,
yeah, Better Call
we
Saul would be there. Like, I don't know who would be the new faces of like how it was back in like 10 years ago, like in the 2010s or anything.
I think it's because we're kind of having a renaissance with like, a decade has passed. Now we're kind of reflecting on that era of writing. But yeah, it's a tricky, it's a fine line to balance when it comes to this kind of stuff. But yeah, any closing thoughts, you guys, about Anti-Heroes or Barry?
Watch Barry if you haven't seen it.
Excellent show.
Yeah.
Josh?
Yeah, I second that. Yeah, watch Barry. The season is done. They did 5 seasons, which is usually, I think, 5 seasons of a show.
They did 4.
It's perfect. Oh, they did 4. Okay.
Yeah.
Usually 4 or 5 seasons typically of a show is perfect length. It's like boom, and then it's each episode's 30 minutes, so you could probably watch it in a week, in 2 days, 3 days.
Yeah.
It's a great, just like the section show. It's like, I can't wait to see what Bill Hader does next, basically.
Yeah. Watch it before
what's
HBO
up,
increases price there.
Oh, sorry. I think people were mentioning, because there are a lot of really good, like sort of horror-esque sequences in Barry. I would love to see him try a horror movie.
Yeah. I've been, if you get time, I would listen to him. Like, there's like a playlist of like him talking about like horror movies, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like The Thing, and The Clockwork Orange. And it's really insightful to find. I'm like, dude, I think exactly the same. But yeah, you see his influences, and it's like, Yeah, no, it's just a once in a lifetime show, basically. Mac, Josh, thanks for having me. I hope to see more of your stuff in the future. And so we're just gonna sign out. Thanks for coming on, guys. Bye.
Thank you,
Yeah.
man.
Take care.